Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here in Amsterdam, and I am especially happy that I'm early in the morning because I'm thinking the weather is so nice outside, everybody's going to run away later during the day, perhaps. So thank you for joining me this morning, and thank you for the kind introductions. Now, when I was asked to present here today, I was asked to do three things. One, give an overview of what we call the digital education disruption, and talk about reimagining education, not just in the academic sense, but more broadly. So that's part one. Part two is to be engaging and to increase audience participation. And number three was to be provocative. So I'll try and do all three. And with the audience participation, well, that depends on you. So if you're not participating, it's not on me. So thank you again for joining me. Now, last night, I arrived yesterday from the US. I'm based in Boston, in Massachusetts, in the northeast of the US. And I made the one big mistake that one should never make. I arrived here and all went well, not jet lagged, but I got up really early this morning with jet lag and decided I should have another look at my presentation. I just felt like changing things around. So I did that, and part of that might be why we are having some technical difficulties. So if you see me glancing at the screen, it's because I'm not sure which slide is coming next. Okay. But we should be fine. So what I wanted to talk about first and foremost is change. What does change mean in the educational context? And what does change mean to us as individuals and to the organizations that we work for? Then I'll talk a little bit about the role that edX plays in that change, in the digital disruption in the higher education space. And last but not least, hopefully somewhat provocative, I'll talk about 4 or 5 things that each of you should do as you engage in this broader educational economy and the educational industry and then a higher education space, whatever your role is. So those are the 3 things. First of all, let's talk about change and how it impacts all of us, then about edX, and then some thesis. So change, what does change look like? And I'm going to start with a few pictures. This picture was taken a few weeks ago at one of the Fridays for Future events in Aachen in Germany. And those, I figured I could have, for change, I probably could have put a picture up of Donald Trump, and everybody would have said, okay, change, we understand it. Change is happening, and we can't escape it. But I felt it's better to talk about students and talk about how they're impacting a change and their role in the future of change. So I actually believe, irrespective whether you agree with what these students are doing or not, it's really important because they're participating actively in the change, and the change is here to stay. But that wasn't always the case, particularly when we talk about higher education. So in higher education, things really haven't changed for quite a few hundred years. So this is a lecture, 1315 AD in Italy, Laurentius de Valentina, the picture. And when you look at this could be a lecture today. And I'm going to contrast what happened many hundreds of years ago and what happens today through a couple of circles here, because even then, there were 4 key activities that students and learners would engage in. And many of you are engaging in those activities right now. So in the first one, there were those that were gossiping and talking about everything but the lecture. You see those up there. Then there were those that were sleeping. Happens at every lecture. Someone will sleep. Then there were those, okay, then it was a book. I call that checking Facebook or social media. And then last but not least, really important, there are those who are seeking to flirt with the other sex, or the same sex, or whatever it was. But anyway, flirting. So that was 1350. Now, you ask yourself, well, but today is different, right? Well, first of all, there was a change. We had the blackboard. So that was change one. But then we come to today's lecture. So this picture is from 2016. I couldn't find a more recent one. This is at MIT. And remember the other four things that people were doing? So there is someone checking social media. There is someone who's sleeping. There is someone who's gossiping, but they're just doing it online now. And again, there are people who are trying to flirt. So you see, over many, many hundreds of years, really nothing has changed in education. At least not from a student perspective. But things have, of course, changed. Things have changed in that the new classroom often looks like this. Students today don't come to lecture halls. They take their computer, and to give you an example, at MIT today, 98% of all students take online classes as part of their core on-campus curriculum. It is an integral part of the delivery of pedagogy and didactics at the university that students take online courses. They have choices. They can take a hybrid course, they can take a purely online course, or they can take a blended course. And they can still do to traditional classrooms. So that's still about change, and that's change in the academic sense through picture. But what does change look like in a society? And again, I'll very quickly go through four pictures. So this is in 2005, St. Peter's Square in Rome, a picture. The Pope was coming out, and you see the people waiting there. And if you look very carefully, you'll see one or two things there. Bottom right-hand corner, you see one, mobile devices, 2005. The next picture, same place, 2013. So let's go back. First, in 2005, I described it was about experiencing things. Then it became about capturing things. We suddenly had the devices in our hand where we could capture things. This is 2013. 3 years later, it was all about participation, selfie nation. Yeah? So this could be an audience participation. Well, let's all take a big selfie, but I won't. So that's 2016. So what does the future look like? The future, 2025, is all about immersion. It's about being part of it. So we've moved in our educational approach and our engagement from simply observing to really being a key part of the experience. That is critical today to the learners, but it's also critical to you as educators or whatever role you might play in your organization. So that's a change. What other changes are occurring? And these are a number of data sets that aren't mine. I took most of them from the Global Commission on the Future of Work, and I think the presentation is being shared so you can look at the data sources. So over the next 20 years, 56% of jobs are at the risk of automation. Or an average 9% of the jobs of the OECD at high risk of automation. Between 50 and 70% will not be substituted entirely, but a large share will be automated. While less than 5% of all occupations can be automated, about 60% of all occupations have at least 30% of constituent activities can be automated. So technology is changing how we engage with each other, how our jobs are created. Nearly 50% of all companies expect that automation will lead to some reduction of their full-time workforce. So these are scary times, quite frankly. Change isn't easy. And change brings with it uncertainty, but it brings with it some opportunity. So the uncertainty is in the number of jobs and what jobs will exist. 344 million jobs need to be created by 2030. What are those jobs going to be? How are we as educators going to be able to teach the students, the learners, the lifelong learners, so that they can be part of this economy in this future? Because 2 billion people are expected to have informal employment going forward. So this is yet another change that we have to react to, that we have to participate in, that we have to engage with. So what does that mean? We need to reskill, we need to retrain, and we need to recruit. 42% of all millennials say they're likely to leave a company if it lacks future opportunities. So as you're educating, whether in your higher education institutions, whether you're corporate education, no matter which part of the education landscape and life cycle you participate in, always remember, we are now at a time where change is ongoing. It will never stop. And the changes are coming faster and faster because technology is facilitating this. That means learners will need to continue to engage with you throughout their life. So now I come to the future, to what now, the 2030. What can we do? What should we do? So why should we disrupt education? Education today is too costly. Outcomes are not clearly defined. It's not scalable. And technology, as I said, is moving too fast. So that's where we found ourselves at edX in 2012. At Harvard and MIT, we saw that there was change occurring, and we thought, what is one of the things that we can do to make change easier, to facilitate change, to provide broader opportunities? And first and foremost, it started with what the then president of Harvard, Drew Faust, said is, knowledge is the most important currency of the 21st century. If we can accept that knowledge is one of the most important, we argue the most important currency of the 21st century, what do we need to do to enable people to participate, to become valued constituencies in the community? We need to use key levers. And obviously those levers are based on what I talked about earlier: technology, cost, relevancy, scale. But one critical factor that was missing is trust. Who do we trust to deliver education? Who do we trust to engage with our learners, with our children? And we believe that trust is critical, because without trust, what is there? So we established a nonprofit open source organization in 2012, Harvard and MIT, as a membership organization to build a trusted community of like-minded institutions. And our goal is to increase access to higher education to anyone in the world with an internet access. Our goal is to enhance teaching and learning both on campus and online. And last but not least, how do we do that? We need to engage in research. Research is a critical aspect of what we deem, let's call it Education 4.0. Education 1.0 was the book. Education 2.0 was the blackboard. Education 3.0, that's the internet. Education 4.0, that's learning analytics. That's really truly understanding what drives value in higher education and in education overall. And we want to play a critical part in that together with partners. We want to disrupt and scale education through innovative new products. Just this morning, actually, I was reading the mayor of Seattle in the northwest of the US said that in the next 10 years, they expect that 70% of all new jobs, technology, 70% of all new jobs will require some form of higher education experience. Now, the important thing is he said some form. It didn't say it needed to have a bachelor degree, it didn't need to have a master's degree or a doctorate, some form of higher education experience. And what we believe is that through modular approaches, through stackable credentials that are innovative, that are different, that don't follow a linear pathway, we can achieve that together with you. So modular, stacked education, extremely important. So what do we do around scale and cost? Scale and cost can be minimized, the cost can be minimized, and scale can be improved simply by broadening access. And what we've done is over the last 7 years, we've reached 21 million learners with 2,600 courses. That's edX.org. But as I said, we're an open source community, so what we've done is there's OpenEdX, which is the open source platform, which actually in its reach is larger than edX.org. And I know many partners in Europe and the US are utilizing the OpenEdX platform for learning analytics, for teaching, etc. So we have 32 languages, 60 countries, 800 open instances, and 25 million learners. So again, it's about trust, it's about an open community, and it's about change. For those of you, since we are in Europe, I'm not going to talk through all the countries, and since we're in Holland, there are just under 150,000 learners in Holland at the moment on edX. In Europe, about 2.2 million. So now I come to the change and to the impact together, how we initiate this change. So I talked about Education 4.0, and Education 4.0 is about learning analytics. It's about understanding what drives educational outcomes, rather than simply delivering what I do here. A lecture, everybody listens, and everybody goes away. No, we need to have feedback loops. We need to have an engagement process. So what we've done is we use the data we collect for research purposes. I'll give you just one example. So active learning, everybody knows this. This is not a new concept. This active learning concept hasn't been around just since the internet arrived. It's been around since the 1950s. A lot of research has been done on this. So active learning improves outcome. So what we have assessed is there are different modalities. You can deliver in the online sense, you can deliver video, you can deliver discussions together with videos, or you can have interpolated or interleaved activities. So where you have videos, activities, learning, assessments, all engaged. And then we tested how would learners perform if they would go to lecture and just watch a video? How would they perform if they come to lecture, watch the video, plus had discussion forums? And then last but not least, how would they perform if we interleaved all the different assessment types, the learning, the engagement, the forums, plus the classroom? As you can see, the more engagement the learners had with each other, with the faculty member, the better the results. Now that's pretty straightforward. Everybody is going to say, yeah, of course, that's a given. So we said, but how come this happens? And so what we did is we did some neuroscience assessment. We actually hooked people up and tested through ECG, their activity and brainwave activities. And what we did is we said, what happens with regards to activity if they just watch video? And by the way, I hope you can see it, the darker blue means more activity. So if you watch a video, all of us know that I admit, I love watching a video, a movie, but does it do a lot for my brain? Not necessarily. Discussions. You see a little bit more blue activity. Learners were more engaged. Their brain was more engaged. There was more activity. And last but not least, interpolated testing. There was the most activity, brain activity, as learners engaged with different modalities. So what does that mean for all of us? It means that as you engage, as you think through your pedagogical approach, don't do what I do just right now. Stand there, talk to people, and then expect them to retain information, to utilize that information, and then apply it in their future. So this is really important. Anything you do should be clearly defined with objectives in mind and with outcomes in mind. And test, do research. So what, based on some of the things that we've done, are some of the key considerations for the next 5 years? And I could have said the next 2 years, but 5 years seemed like a good time frame. So there's strategic and policy considerations that each and every single one of us should engage in. First of all, think about what's the role of the public? What is the role of the students? I did start with a picture of the students, the Fridays for Futures. Or Futures for Fridays? Anybody know? Fridays for Futures, Futures for Fridays. Anyway, the students, they need to be part of the process. They are the future, so engage them. The public should be engaged as well. If we are truly believing in this lifelong learning concept, let's make sure that the public is engaged and that the public participates. What is the role of government? If you are from the US, you might have a very different perspective to someone who is from Europe, who is from Asia. The role of government in education is quite frankly at a cusp probably in many societies. Should there be more investment? Should there be less investment? Should there be, in the US, there's huge student debt. Should student debt be forgiven? Should it not be forgiven? Should students pay for their education? Should it be pretty much for free like it is in Germany or in Scandinavia? Those are societal issues that we need to discuss, and we need to come to some sort of consensus globally. What role does your organization play in this ecosystem? Where do you fit in? I think one of the biggest issues higher education institutions face today is that often they don't ask themselves that question. They're still quite content in the experience that they've had in some instances for hundreds of years, in some other instances maybe only for 10, 20 years. But always, irrespective of which organization you work for, ask yourself, what role does my organization play in the outcome? And where should we invest? And a large investment is required. Don't underestimate the investment that's required. So learning pathways, the next thought for the future. Our current learning pathways are simply not appropriate and adequate for the 21st century. I know Bologna in Europe was a wonderful change in many ways. It allowed for the first time for a bachelor degree. But what we've done is become an even more linear approach towards education, which isn't what the learners need today. We need to move away from a linear pathway where everything is predetermined and predefined, and where everything is the same for everyone. We need to define modalities and delivery models that are appropriate for the different audiences. And that means a lot of work, quite frankly. And that's where investment and your role is so important. We need to offer the differentiated learning pathways. So at a minimum, if you're a teacher, ask yourself, what are the different modalities I can engage my learners with? How do I embrace them? How do I embrace the outcome I'm looking for? The student experience. So if you ask your learner, what are they looking for? What is the added value of an on-campus experience? What is the added value of the experience of coming to university? What is the added value of coming to a conference? Is it the relationships you gain? Is it the conversations you have? Is it hopefully something you hear and learn from someone you talk with? And how much of the degree should be completed in that given time frame? Why does a student have to stay on campus for 3, 4, however many years it is to achieve their degree? Why not spend 2 years on campus, then work for 5 years, and then come back to campus? There is a really interesting concept right now that the National University of Singapore is establishing, which is called the concept of the lifelong learner and the concept of design your own module. Learners still have a pathway and a framework that they engage with, but there are 2 new facets to this. One, they're learners for life. Once you're enrolled for life. And 2, you can design your own module. You can complement and augment the framework that's given to you through third resources for which you receive credit. And that's the new opportunity that MOOCs and other online modalities deliver today. Suddenly you could be in Singapore, you could be here in Amsterdam, and you can participate in courses from Harvard, from Berkeley, from the National University of Singapore, wherever it might be. That is something that all of us should think about, is how do we consume material and how do we make materials available? Impact on spaces. So if we are changing as organizations, not just as academic institutions, but organizations, if we are changing how we approach education and society, how does that impact our spaces? Do we need lecture halls? Why do we need lecture halls? How do we scale? I know in Germany at 2 of the Munich universities, TUM and LMU, they often do videos of the learners. There are 1,500 students enrolled in an introductory course. And so what they do is, we don't have lecture halls large enough, so they have 300 in one lecture hall, and they have another 400 in another lecture hall, and they're video streaming as well, but streaming. So that is not education, quite frankly. That's entertainment. There's nothing wrong with entertainment, but let's not pretend it's about education. Last but not least, collaborations and internationalizations. I'll start with the last point. If any of us, including we at edX, including Harvard and MIT, who are doing wonderful things and are very, very well financed, if any of us think we can do this by ourselves, we are absolutely wrong. No one can do this by themselves. This is a challenge that we can only collectively overcome. We together need to embrace this. We together need to work. And I think that's a dangerous time. I started by saying we are at a time of change. I would argue we are probably at the most profound societal and technological change that we've experienced since the Second World War. And we have the choices to make. We can decide whether we bury the hatches and exclude others, or whether we are inclusive, whether we seek collaborations or whether we don't. I think it's pretty clear that we believe collaborations are key to this, that we need to work together. And the scaling, quite frankly, makes it necessary. We have to date invested into edX close to about $300 million. And we're nowhere near being able to define what the solutions are. But together with you, we can make it happen. So what are the key themes for the next 5 years? Educators, you can drive innovation, not just technology innovation, but innovation overall. And the innovation of the pathways, including alternative credentials, is going to accelerate. It's going to accelerate substantially faster and faster and faster. Collaborations are extremely important and increasingly important. Employers will continue to accept those alternative credentials. I'll give you an example. In Massachusetts, we're working with Microsoft and General Electric, and they're guaranteeing interviews to learners who've completed a MicroMasters, so a micro-credential. You don't have to have a bachelor, you don't have to have a master's. If you complete the set of courses towards a micro-credential, you're guaranteed an interview. That is a substantial and fundamental change to where we are today. And then last but not least, I said, Education 4.0, research and analytics are critical. You must engage in research and analytics. So where are we today? The future is already here today, and many of you have heard this before in the B2B space or in the business space. We talk about omnichannel. Omnichannel essentially means many, many different pathways and opportunities and distribution channels and engagement channels become part of the broader spectrum. It's not just about going to campus. It's not just about the degree. It's about access, it's about experiences, and it's about credentials. And these are just some examples. There could be many, many more, and many of you hopefully play a role in defining what those future credentials are. And the traditional, I call it here traditional education, is going to be key to engaging all of us in making change happen. So let me finish by saying, what are the 4 aspects of making change happen? Access and unbundling of education. You have to provide access to everyone, irrespective of their background. And you need to unbundle things. You need to think about credits and certifications, different pathways. You have to collaborate and build bridges to others, be it within your own community, be it within your country, be it within your regions, but you must collaborate and build bridges. And last but not least, irrespective whether you work for a corporation, whether you work for a nonprofit, whether you work for a for-profit, a higher education institution, you will experience operational change. And with that operational change, you must acknowledge that pedagogical changes are going to happen. And you have a choice to make. Are you going to be part of it? Are you going to watch from the sidelines? I encourage all of you to be a big, big part of it. I know many of you already are, or perhaps all of you. And if there's anything that we at edX can do to work together with you to make that change happen, to have a conversation, please let me know. We'd be delighted to do so. And to work on this. The future of education is personalized, modular, in demand, and on demand. Thank you very much.